There's a moment when the noise stops, when the chaos around you reaches its peak, when everyone else is drowning in their reactions, their impulses, their desperate need to be heard. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can join the storm, let it pull you under, let your emotions become the captain of your ship. Or you can do what Machiavelli would have done. You can become the eye of the hurricane, completely still, completely aware, completely in control while everything else spins into madness around you. Most people think emotional control means suppression. They think it's about bottling up feelings, pretending they don't exist, walking through life like some emotionless machine. But that's not mastery. That's just another form of slavery. Because suppressed emotions don't disappear. They leak. They build pressure. They explode at the worst possible moments. And when they do, you lose everything you've worked to build. Machiavelli understood something different, something darker and far more powerful. He knew that emotions aren't the enemy. They're intelligence, raw, unfiltered data about your environment, your relationships, your position in the world. The problem isn't having emotions. The problem is letting them have you. Because the moment your emotions start making decisions for you, you become predictable. And predictable people get used, manipulated, discarded. You felt it before. That burning rage when someone disrespects you. The crushing anxiety before a big decision. The desperate need for approval that makes you say yes when you should say no. The jealousy that eats at you from the inside. These aren't weaknesses. They're signals. But most people can't read the signals because they're too busy drowning in them. They react instead of respond. They explode instead of calculate. They bleed emotion all over everyone around them and wonder why no one takes them seriously. Here's what nobody tells you about emotional mastery. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming surgical. It's not about feeling nothing. It's about choosing when to feel, how much to feel, and what to do with what you feel. Because in a world where everyone else is emotionally reactive, the person who maintains composure doesn't just survive, they dominate. Think about the most powerful people you know, not the loudest ones, not the ones who throw tantrums or make scenes, the ones who command respect without demanding it, the ones whose silence carries more weight than other people's words, the ones who make decisions based on strategy, not impulse. They all share one trait. They've learned to separate what they feel from what they do. And that separation is where real power lives. But here's the trap most people fall into. They try to eliminate emotions instead of mastering them. They think strength means never feeling hurt, never feeling angry, never feeling vulnerable. So they build walls, they shut down, they become numb. And yes, numbness protects you from pain, but it also cuts you off from everything else. Joy, connection, passion, drive. You become safe, but empty, protected, but powerless. Machiavelli would have laughed at this approach. He didn't believe in emotional numbness. He believed in emotional intelligence weaponized. He understood that feelings give you information about power dynamics, about threats, about opportunities. But he also knew that the moment you let those feelings control your actions, you hand over your power to whoever triggered them. And once you've done that, you're no longer the player in the game. You're just another piece being moved around the board. So what does real emotional mastery look like? It starts with something most people never develop: the ability to observe your own emotions without being consumed by them, to feel anger without becoming angry, to experience fear without being paralyzed by it, to notice jealousy without letting it poison your judgment. This isn't suppression. This is separation. The emotion exists, but it doesn't own you. Imagine you're in a heated argument. Someone says something designed to provoke you. Most people react instantly. They defend, they attack, they justify, they explain. Their emotion takes the wheel and drives them straight into exactly the reaction the other person wanted. But the emotionally masterful person does something different. They feel the anger rise. They notice it, they acknowledge it, and then they choose what to do with it. Maybe they use it as fuel for a calculated response. Maybe they file it away as information about the other person's tactics. Maybe they simply let it pass through them like weather. The key is the gap. That split second between feeling and acting. Most people have no gap. Stimulus and response are welded together. Someone pushes their button and they react automatically, predictably, controllably. But mastery creates space in that gap. Time to think, time to choose, time to decide whether this emotion serves your goals or sabotages them. But creating that gap isn't easy. It requires you to develop a skill most people never even attempt. The ability to watch your own mind, to become the observer of your own thoughts and feelings instead of their victim. Because right now, most of your emotions happen to you. They arise unbidden, take control of your body, flood your brain with chemicals, and dictate your behavior. You're not choosing them. They're choosing you. This is where the real work begins. Not in controlling emotions, but in developing the capacity to witness them. To create enough psychological space between you and your feelings that you can see them clearly, understand what they're telling you, and decide consciously how to respond. This isn't about becoming a robot. It's about becoming the programmer instead of the program. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their emotional patterns. The same triggers set them off in the same ways, over and over again. They get angry at the same things, anxious about the same situations, hurt by the same types of people. They're stuck in emotional loops that keep them weak, reactive, and easily manipulated. Because once someone knows your emotional buttons, they own you. They can make you dance to their rhythm whenever they want. But what if you could break free from those patterns? What if instead of being controlled by your emotions, you could harness them? What if your anger could become focused intensity instead of blind rage? What if your fear could become careful planning instead of paralysis? What if your sadness could become deep wisdom instead of self-pity? This is what Machiavelli understood about power. It's not about having no emotions. It's about having emotional sovereignty. The ability to feel everything, but let nothing control you. To use your emotions as tools, instead of being used by them as weapons against yourself. Because in the end, the person who can maintain clarity in the middle of chaos, composure in the face of provocation, and strategic thinking under pressure doesn't just survive the game. They rewrite the rules. And here's what makes this so powerful. In a world full of people who are emotionally reactive, the person who isn't stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. They become magnetic not because they're perfect, but because they're stable. Not because they don't feel, but because they don't bleed their feelings all over everyone around them. People gravitate toward emotional stability because it's so rare, and rare things have value. But achieving this level of mastery requires more than just understanding the concept. It requires a complete rewiring of how you relate to your inner world. It requires techniques that most people have never heard of. Practices that go deeper than positive thinking or breathing exercises. It requires you to develop a relationship with your emotions that transforms them from enemies into allies. The question is, are you ready to stop being a slave to your feelings and start being their master? Because once you cross that line, once you develop true emotional sovereignty, everything changes. The way people respond to you, the way you move through conflict, the way you make decisions, the way you show up in the world. You become untouchable, not because nothing affects you, but because you choose how to be affected. The first skill you must master is what Machiavelli would have called the art of the pause. Not hesitation, not weakness, strategic delay. Because in that microscopic moment between trigger and reaction lies the difference between kings and subjects. Most people collapse that space entirely. Someone insults them, they fire back instantly. Someone threatens them, they either flee or fight without calculation. Someone manipulates them, they dance to the tune before they even realize music is playing. But the emotionally sovereign person expands that pause. They feel the lightning strike of emotion, but they don't let it complete the circuit. Instead, they observe it like a scientist studying a fascinating specimen. What is this feeling telling me? Where is it coming from? What does the person triggering this want me to do? And most importantly, what response serves my interests, not my impulses? This isn't about becoming slow or indecisive. It's about becoming deliberate. Because when you respond from choice rather than reflex, your responses carry weight. People sense the difference between someone reacting and someone choosing, and they treat you accordingly. Here's what most people don't understand about emotional triggers. They're not random. They're not accidents. They're carefully mapped territories in your psychological landscape, and everyone around you is constantly scanning for them. Your boss knows exactly what tone of voice makes you defensive. Your family knows precisely which buttons to push to get you to comply. Your enemies know exactly how to bait you into self-destruction. These triggers exist because somewhere in your past, you learned that certain emotions were dangerous. Maybe anger got you punished, so now you either explode or suppress it completely. Maybe vulnerability got you hurt, so now you armor yourself against any situation that might expose you. Maybe confidence got you mocked, so now you shrink yourself to avoid standing out. But here's the trap. Those old patterns that once protected you are now controlling you. The child's survival strategy has become the adult's prison, and everyone who wants to manipulate you has a key to that prison. They know exactly how to make you feel small, angry, guilty, or afraid. And once they've triggered that emotion, they can predict your behavior with mathematical precision. Breaking free requires you to do something most people find terrifying. You have to feel the emotion fully without acting on it, not suppress it, not judge it, not try to make it go away. Just let it exist in your body while maintaining complete control over your choices. This is where most people fail. They think emotional mastery means never feeling overwhelmed. But true mastery is feeling overwhelmed and still making strategic decisions. The next level is what Machiavelli would have recognized as emotional misdirection. You don't just control your own emotions. You learn to influence others' emotions while keeping your own hidden. This isn't manipulation in the petty sense. It's understanding that emotions are contagious, and whoever controls the emotional climate of a room controls everything that happens in that room. Watch how this works in practice. Someone enters a space radiating anxiety, and soon everyone feels unsettled. Someone else walks in with calm confidence, and the entire atmosphere shifts. Most people think this happens accidentally, but the emotionally masterful person does it intentionally. They become a thermostat instead of a thermometer. They don't just reflect the emotional temperature around them. They set it. This requires you to develop something most people never cultivate: emotional range on command. The ability to access different emotional states consciously, deliberately, strategically. Not fake emotions, real ones, but chosen ones. You walk into a negotiation and you need to project calm authority. You don't hope you'll feel confident. You access confidence like selecting a tool from a toolbox. You're dealing with someone who's trying to intimidate you, and you need to remain unshakable. You don't pray that fear won't arise. You feel the fear, acknowledge its information, and then consciously shift into a state of cool assessment. The fear becomes data about the threat level. It doesn't become your master. But here's where it gets truly advanced. You learn to use other people's emotions against them without them realizing it. Not in a cruel way, but in a strategic one. Someone is trying to make you angry, so you'll say something stupid. Instead of taking the bait, you remain perfectly calm while they escalate. Soon, They're the one looking unhinged while you appear reasonable. Their own tactic has backfired. Someone is trying to guilt you into compliance. Instead of defending yourself or giving in, you simply observe their emotional manipulation with detached interest. You might even comment on it directly. It seems like you're trying to make me feel guilty about this decision. That's interesting. Why do you think guilt would be an effective strategy here? Suddenly they're exposed and their power evaporates. This level of emotional mastery creates something most people never experience. True freedom. Because when you're no longer a slave to your emotional patterns, when you're no longer predictable in your reactions, when you can maintain clarity under pressure and influence the emotional climate around you, you become genuinely dangerous in the best possible way. Not dangerous because you'll hurt people, but dangerous because you can't be controlled. You can't be manipulated. You can't be baited into self-sabotage. You can't be made to dance to someone else's tune. And in a world where most people are emotional puppets, the person who cuts their own strings becomes a force of nature. But achieving this requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires practice in situations where the stakes matter. It requires you to deliberately enter scenarios that trigger your old patterns and consciously choose new responses. It requires you to fail, learn, adjust, and try again until new pathways are carved into your nervous system. The transformation isn't comfortable. There will be moments when every instinct screams at you to react the old way, to explode when provoked, to shrink when challenged, to people please when threatened with disapproval. But each time you choose differently, each time you expand that pause between stimulus and response, you reclaim another piece of your sovereignty. And here's what makes this journey worth it. Once you've mastered your emotional world, once you've learned to feel everything without being controlled by anything, you don't just become more powerful, you become more alive, because you're no longer running from half of human experience. You're no longer afraid of your own feelings. You can dive deep into anger, sadness, fear, joy, passion, and pain without losing yourself in any of them. You become someone who can be fully present with others' emotions too. Not because you're trying to fix them or manage them, but because you're not afraid of them. When someone else is in emotional chaos, you can remain steady, not cold, but stable, a lighthouse in their storm. This is the ultimate test of everything Machiavelli understood about power. Because real power isn't about controlling others. It's about being so sovereign over your own internal world that external chaos can't touch your core. You become the immovable center around which everything else revolves. And here's what separates the truly masterful from everyone else. They don't just manage their emotions in crisis. They use emotional mastery as a daily practice. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to strengthen their sovereignty. Every trigger becomes a chance to choose differently. Every moment of potential reactivity becomes a test of their discipline. Watch how this transforms your relationships. When you're no longer emotionally reactive, people can't push your buttons because you've disconnected the wiring. They try their old tactics and nothing happens. They escalate, looking for the reaction they're used to getting, and instead they find stillness. This unsettles them because suddenly their power over you has evaporated. But something even more powerful happens. When you're not bleeding your emotions all over everyone around you, when you're not seeking validation or approval, when you're not trying to manage how others feel about you, you become magnetic. People are drawn to emotional stability because it's so rare. They want to be around someone who isn't going to explode, manipulate, or drain them. Your presence becomes healing instead of chaotic. Not because you're perfect, but because you're controlled. You can hold space for others' emotions without being infected by them. You can remain clear when they're confused, steady when they're shaking, calm when they're spiraling. This is what Machiavelli would have called the highest form of influence. Not through force or manipulation, but through the sheer power of unshakable presence. When you can remain centered while others lose their way, They naturally look to you for guidance. They trust your judgment because it isn't clouded by emotional turbulence. They follow your lead because you're not being led by your feelings. But the greatest gift of emotional mastery isn't what it does for your external world. It's what it does for your internal one. When you're no longer afraid of your own emotions, when you can feel anger without becoming violent, sadness without becoming depressed, fear without becoming paralyzed, you reclaim parts of yourself you might have lost years ago. You can pursue what you actually want instead of what feels safe. You can speak truth instead of what people want to hear. You can take risks instead of hiding behind comfort. You can love deeply without the terror of loss controlling every moment. You can create boldly without the fear of judgment strangling your vision. This is the freedom Machiavelli was really writing about. Not political freedom, but psychological liberation. The ability to move through the world without being moved by every emotional wind that blows. To feel everything without being enslaved by anything. To remain yourself regardless of who's trying to change you. Most people spend their entire lives as prisoners of their emotional patterns, dancing to triggers they don't understand, controlled by reactions they can't predict. They blame others for their responses, circumstances for their choices, the past for their present. But the emotionally sovereign person knows the truth. No one can make you feel anything. They can only reveal what's already inside you. And once you accept that responsibility, once you stop giving your power away to everyone who knows which buttons to push, you cross a line that changes everything. You become someone who cannot be controlled, manipulated, or broken by external forces. Not because nothing affects you, but because you choose how to be affected. The world will test this mastery constantly. People will try to bait you into old patterns. Situations will arise designed to trigger your deepest fears. Life will serve you exactly the experiences you need to either grow stronger or fall back into reactivity. And every single time, you'll have the same choice. React from your old programming or respond from your sovereignty. Choose sovereignty. Choose mastery. Choose to become the kind of person who can walk through fire without being burned, who can face storms without being moved, who can love without losing themselves. Because in the end, the only real power anyone has is the power over their own mind. Master that, and you master everything. This is how you rule your emotions instead of being ruled by them. This is how you become untouchable while remaining fully human. This is how you live like Machiavelli would have lived if he understood what you now understand. Not as a victim of your feelings, but as their master. Not as someone who suppresses emotions, but as someone who transforms them into weapons of wisdom, tools of influence, and sources of unshakable strength. The choice is yours. The power has always been yours. The question is whether you're finally ready to claim it.